Hey there, I'm Joey from EDA Trek, and I've got a question for you. What's the most unique card in your commander deck? If you're not sure, allow me to share a quick trick that will help you figure it out. One of the most enjoyable parts of deck building is, of course, the pet cards. The cards that you play that no one else plays, the things that other players have perhaps never even heard of. And it's usually pretty easy to see whether or not people are playing that card, right? In general, it's easy to just glance at a commander's EDA Trek page or take a glimpse at its average deck and see whether or not your pet card shows up there. And of course, we highly recommend using the advanced filters on your favorite commander's page to see how many decks that card really shows up in. But there's also another really cool tool on EDA Trek that's actually been around for a while, but that not a lot of folks have used, and it can help you find the most original cards in your deck. Here's how it works. On EDA Trek, go to the Recs tab up here on the top menu. This will open up a new page where you can input your commander or commanders, and then there's a section for your deck list. I'll quickly pop over to Architect, because that's where I have my deck lists stored, and I'll copy my whole deck list. By the way, if you want to see all of our deck lists, there's a link in the description of all of our videos that will take you right to them. Once I've got that list copied, let's go back to EDA Trek and paste that in, and then hit Submit. Simple as that. The first page that shows up are the recommendations. These are popular cards from that commander's page and cards that show up frequently in the 99s with other cards in your list. In other words, it's a really quick way to find popular cards that you're not playing without having to scroll through a whole bunch of pages. It's just all right here for you super conveniently. And I've definitely found some pretty cool recommendations this way. It also shows me a lot of cards that I have intentionally veered away from. For instance, we can see based on these recommendations that a lot of Thalisse players use Aristocrats effects in their Thalisse deck. But I've avoided those in my version of Thalisse because I wanted a classic go-wide combat strategy where I just pump up all of my tokens and win with combat damage instead. It's not the popular way to build her, but just because some cards are popular doesn't mean that they're the right cards for me, and EDA Trek is, of course, not a prescription. Now, the second tab here, the one that's labeled Your Deck, that's what I'm most excited to talk about, because this is where you find the least popular cards in your deck. Sorted by how little play they see in that commander or archetype, you can look at the cards that stand out the most from your list compared to the rest of the data out there. So here, for instance, we see that one of the most unique cards in my Thalisse deck is the card Dark Triumph, a recent card I've added to get some surprise damage through for 0 mana at instant speed after opponents have declared their blockers. We also see that Flagstones of Trocaire shows up as a pretty unusual card in my Thalisse deck, because most folks don't play this one. I mean, the effect is so fringe that there's hardly ever any need to bother with it, so why am I even playing this one, right? Well, my reason is because my Thalisse deck uses Field of the Dead, so I want to play as many different lands with different names as possible without affecting my color balances to speed up how quickly I can start making those extra zombie tokens. Or here's another example. Let's swap to my Barakos and Folk Hero deck. On the recommendations page, we've got some popular stuff I'm not playing, like Seasoned Dungeoneer. I've simply chosen to refrain from playing this one because I didn't want this deck to worry about the initiative. I like the initiative dungeon mechanic a lot, actually, but I'm a very all or nothing kind of guy, so I would want more than just one card in my deck to mess with dungeons if I'm going to use the initiative at all. And as for my most unique cards in this list, looks like not a lot of Barakos Folk Hero players are trying out Storm of Souls, but I've really enjoyed it here as a one-sided revival effect to get back all of my little creatures after a board wipe. Nearly all my creatures are 1 and 2 power already anyway, so I don't mind the restriction that this one puts on them, and I found it to be pretty relevant that this spell gives them flying when they're revived. Or there are some unique lands that it turns out I'm playing, like Roadside Reliquary, which works terrifically here because Barakos makes treasure artifacts, and Folk Hero is almost always in play as an enchantment, so this land can pretty consistently sacrifice to draw 2 if I need a late game boost of cards. Looks like the card Nightclubber is one of my most unique creatures too. It meets the party condition as a warrior, and I've had a lot of trouble in this deck against enemy token players, so this one has been really helpful for me to wipe out enemy token armies, such as a mass of Scoot Swarms. Looking over this page is really cool, because I get to see all the extra little flourishes that I've added to my deck after my experiences playing it. And man, let's keep going. Here are the results for my Karazakar Goad list, and it looks like not a lot of Karazakar players are using cards like Backlash, but I mean, I highly recommend this card. If there's a big creature in play, this is a cool surprise way to smack its controller for some real big damage. Or here's another interesting one. Nightmare Shepherd and Mimic Vat appear to be pretty unique cards for my Karazikar deck too, but I like them to help keep the pain rolling along after a big setback, because I've found it just takes me a really long time to rebuild the board otherwise. These cards are apparently pretty unusual for this deck, but I've found them to be pretty important for the way that I am playing, and it's nice to have that type of intentionality about the cards that you're choosing to put into your deck. When using EDHREC, especially a tool like this one, it's possible to feel a little worried, perhaps a little peer pressured, like, oh, here are a bunch of popular cards that I'm not playing. Am I doing it wrong? Or you see that other people aren't playing the type of stuff that you are playing. Does that mean that the thing you think is cool tech is actually just bad? No, the answer is no. Because first of all, if you're playing pet cards that you like just because you like them, that is reason enough. Who cares what anyone else is doing? Play the fun thing. But second of all, deviating from the norm is often informed by experience and by strategical reasoning. Often the way that we build a deck initially is not the same way that that deck looks after we've had it for years and years and years. As we get more familiar with the deck, we'll find redundancies to cut out, or tech that solves problems that maybe new adopters of that commander have not yet encountered. You know, a lot of players might be using X card in this deck, but I've found that maybe I don't need it, or it doesn't match the tempo that I play at, or instead of playing X card, I'm playing Y and Z card instead to cover that card's job a little bit better, and so on. So trust your instincts. There are tons of good reasons to stick with the norm, it's true, but there are also tons of great reasons to deviate from it. And as I kind of hinted at before, there are tons of commanders out there that have multiple different build paths, so of course your data is going to differ. For instance, I have a Virtus and Gorm deck, and my list has maybe a 40% match with the average deck according to EDHREC. I built my list around Virtus specifically, making him unblockable and focusing a whole lot on life chopping, whereas tons of other players have built their Virtus and Gorm decks around Gorm specifically, and using a lot of lore effects to force opponents into tough combat positions. Neither of us is right or wrong, they're just different strats under a similar looking umbrella. But side note, if it turns out that I've found a card anywhere on EDHREC, either through this tool or from any regular EDHREC page, and I think, maybe I should give that card a try, did you know that you can just click and drag from EDHREC directly into the Archidekt deck building website and it will add the card to your deck that way? Because that's way nifty, and it sure beats having to type up tons of different card names. Or, as another quick example of deviations from the data, in my Titania Protector of Argoth deck, it looks like one of my most unique cards there is Stonecedar Hierophant, an amazing land untapper that has launched me into victory tons of times by banking me sometimes upwards of like 40 or 50 mana by untapping Lotus Field a bazillion times after I cast, say, Escape Shift. There aren't a lot of people playing it, but I think this card is so good. It looks like it also isn't too popular to use Eldrazi Monument in Titania decks either, but I've loved this one in that deck for years to give the team surprise flying in green, which often helps me achieve lethal damage that people didn't expect. Plus, it's a little wrath insurance because it makes stuff indestructible, which feels especially good because for me to get all of these elemental tokens in the first place, I have to sacrifice all of my lands, so a board wipe takes me out of the game for good. Other folks may not be playing this one, but I've learned that in that card slot, I really appreciate the duality of a lethal damage enabler and an insurance policy all wrapped up in one. And heck, it looks like another mildly unique card that I play in Titania compared to other Titania players is the card Nissa's Pilgrimage. But why? In a mono green deck, this is another Cultivate, with more potential upside. Cultivate shows up in 55% of Titania decks, but the Pilgrimage only shows up in 17%? That's wild. What's going on there? These are little standouts that don't match up with the average Titania experience, but that's exactly the point, right? None of our decks are the average experience. In fact, even if you build exactly the average deck list for any given commander, that's still not an average deck. That's your deck. What matters isn't the data, what matters is your experience with the cards. If you think they're good, and if you like them. Your deck is your deck because of what you put into it. And I'm not just talking about the cards. I mean the joy that you put into it. It's your deck because of how you play it. Even if you and I happened to brew exactly the same list of 100 cards, the cards are not the important part. The fun that we have with those decks, that's the important part. And ultimately, it's just kind of neat to use tools like these to help find cards that perhaps other players haven't seen before, so that you can surprise them with your fun tech or perhaps just funny tech in your next game night. So, what are the most unique cards in your Commander decks? Sound off in the comments below, appease the YouTube gods by liking and subscribing and doing all of the things that the algorithm demands of us. I clearly don't know how to do effective calls to action, but thank you so much for watching, and until next time, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.